My name is Ensley Woods, and I was 28 years old when a neighbor called to tell me my grandmother had died, because my own parents didn't think I needed to know. 10 years earlier, my mom and my dad had set two suitcases on the front porch, 2 weeks after my 18th birthday, and changed the locks while I stood there holding my backpack. Now they were sitting in the front pew at Nana's funeral, and my mother was squeezing my hand like she'd done it every day for a decade, whispering, "We should talk about the estate, sweetheart. As a family." They thought they were coming back for money. What they walked into was the one room in America where my grandmother could still speak for herself. And what the judge read out loud on page 4, that part, nobody in my family saw coming. Including me. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where family secrets come to light, and quiet people finally get their say. If you've ever been made to feel like you owed your family your whole life, this one's for you. Drop a comment below, tell me where you're listening from, and be sure to subscribe. I was on shift when Ruth called. I'm a hospice nurse, and that Tuesday in March I was sitting with a patient across the county, holding his hand through the quiet of 4 in the morning, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I stepped into the hallway. Ruth Delgado had lived next door to my grandmother for 30 years, and she was crying so hard I couldn't understand her at first. Marlene Woods had died in her sleep sometime before dawn. Peacefully. In her own bed. In her own house. Which was the only way she would have accepted the arrangement. Then Ruth said the part that put ice in my spine. "Honey, your parents have known since 7 this morning. I waited all day for you to come. When you didn't, I figured nobody told you." It was after 4 in the afternoon. 9 hours. My grandmother had been gone 9 hours, and the two people who called themselves her family had let me find out from a neighbor. I drove the 20 minutes to Maple Glen with my hands steady on the wheel, because hospice teaches you to fall apart later, on your own time. Her porch light was on. It clicked on every evening at 7, and it was burning now against the dark like nothing in the world had changed. On the front door, someone had taped an index card in my mother's tidy loan officer handwriting. Contents inventoried. Please do not remove items. Signed, G and P Woods. She had been dead less than a day. My parents had already made a list of everything inside that house. I had seen nothing but the porch light. I stood on that porch a long time, and I remembered the last time I'd stood there with suitcases at my feet. You have to know what kind of house I grew up in. In my mother's kitchen, taped to the refrigerator where other families put crayon drawings, there was an invoice. She started it the month I turned 16. Room and board, $150 a month, itemized in blue ink, with a running balance at the bottom. My mother had been a loan officer for 20 years, and she ran our family the way she ran her desk. Birthday gifts came with reminders. That coat wasn't cheap, Ensley. Remember what we do for you? Every kindness was recorded somewhere, gathering interest. My dad never argued with the system. He sat behind his newspaper at the table like a man waiting out weather, and when I looked to him he'd give me this small apologetic shrug, as if the ledger were a law of nature and not his wife's handwriting. Then there was Nana's kitchen, 6 streets over. Saturday mornings, pancakes on a griddle older than my father, coupons clipped and sorted in a shoebox, coffee so weak you could read a newspaper through it. I asked her once, when I was maybe 12, what I owed her for gas money after she'd driven me to a school thing. She laughed so hard she had to sit down. "Eat your pancakes," she said. "You don't owe me a thing. You never will." Same last name, same town, 2 different countries. I spent my whole childhood crossing the border between them and wondering why love cost so much in one house and nothing at all in the other. I didn't have the word for it then. I just knew that in one kitchen I was a daughter, and in the other, I was a debt. And in the spring of 2014, the 2 countries went to war. In April of 2014, when I was 17, Nana had a stroke. A small one, the doctors said. It clipped the edge of her speech for a few weeks and left her right hand slower than she liked, and she attacked her recovery the way she attacked a sale bin, with a list and no patience. I drove her to physical therapy every afternoon after school in her old Buick. That's how I got to watch what my parents did next. My mother showed up to the hospital with a folder. Inside were brochures for a place called Willow Crest Senior Living and a printout from a realtor with an estimate on Nana's house. Nana was still slurring her R's, and my mother was already pricing the walls around her. She told the relatives she was getting ahead of things. She told the doctors she was the responsible one in the family. She used the word manage so many times it started to sound like a threat. Nana said no. She said it slowly, but she said it. And that should have been the end of it. Except a few weeks later I came downstairs at night for water and heard my parents at the kitchen table with the calculator out. My mother was saying words I'd never heard before. Petition, power of attorney, guardianship. My dad was saying, "If you think it's best, Pam." I was 17. I stood in the dark hallway of the Ledger house and Googled the words on my phone, and my stomach dropped through the floor. My mother wasn't planning to help her mother-in-law recover. She was planning to ask a court to declare Nana incompetent, take over her money, and sell her house. And 3 weeks later, she filed the papers for real. Here is what my parents didn't count on. When somebody files to have a person declared incompetent in Ohio, the court doesn't just take their word for it. It sends someone to look. The court investigator was a tired woman with kind eyes and a clipboard, and she came to Nana's house on a Thursday in July while I was there after therapy. She watched Nana make coffee, pay her water bill at the kitchen table, and name the current president, the year, and the exact price of ground beef at Hartman's Grocery, which Nana considered the only current event that mattered. Then the investigator asked me questions, out on the porch, alone. I was 17, and I understood with perfect clarity that both countries were listening. I told the truth. I told her Nana cooked her own meals and balanced her own checkbook. I showed her the little school notebook where I'd been keeping our therapy schedule, every session logged in gel pen, 5 months of Tuesdays and Thursdays. I told her my grandmother was the most competent person I knew, and that nobody in that house needed managing. Dr. Patel, Nana's doctor for 20 years, told the court the same thing in writing. In August of 2014, the petition was denied. Nana kept her house, her money, and her name. My mother didn't scream. That's the thing people get wrong about her. She came out of that courthouse with her chin level, drove me home in a silence you could stand a spoon in, and said one quiet thing at a red light without turning her head. "You'll learn what loyalty costs, Ensley." I thought it was just something bitter people say. 2 months later, I found out it was an invoice. I turned 18 at the end of September. 2 weeks later, I came home from my shift at the Pancake Barn and my key didn't work. The porch light of the Ledger house was off, but I could see the shapes on the welcome mat. 2 suitcases, packed neat, and my backpack from junior year set on top like a bow. My mother opened the door about 4 inches, the chain still on, and she wasn't angry. She was composed, the way she was at her desk when she declined somebody's loan. "You're 18 now," she said. "You made your choice in that courtroom. Family is a ledger, Ensley. And you are deep in the red." Behind her, at the edge of the hallway light, I could see my dad's shadow behind the curtain, not moving. And that shadow told me everything about him I would ever need to know. The door closed. The deadbolt turned. I stood on the porch of the house I grew up in doing math no 18-year-old should do. How much was in my checking account? Whose couch I could ask for? How many shifts until first and last month's rent? Then I picked up the suitcases and walked 6 streets in the October dark, and I knocked on Nana's door at 11 at night. She opened it in her robe. She looked at me and at the suitcases, and she didn't ask one question. She just reached past me and flipped a switch, and the porch light came on over my head, warm and yellow. "Love doesn't keep books, honey," she said. "It keeps a light on." From that night forward, for the rest of her life, that light burned every single evening, so I'd always know which house was mine. I want to tell you the next 10 years were a training montage. Mostly they were just long. I lived in Nana's spare room for a year, then a studio apartment above the hardware store. I waited tables and I took out loans and I put myself through nursing school, and I am proud of that. But I won't pretend it was clean. In November of 2015, when I was 19, I broke. It had been 13 months of double shifts and silence from two people whose voices I still heard in my sleep, and one night my hands wouldn't stop shaking and my thoughts turned into a drain I was circling. I drove myself to the county hospital and I signed myself in. 72 hours in the behavioral health unit. I signed myself in alone, and 3 days later I signed myself out alone, and I told exactly one living soul, which was nobody. Not even Nana. I came out of that building with a rule carved somewhere permanent. Need nothing. Owe nothing. If no one holds anything of yours, no one can drop it. It felt like strength for 10 years. Remember that rule, because it comes back later, in a courtroom, in the worst way. The years stacked up. I got my nursing license at 22 and found my way to hospice work, which sounds grim to people who've never done it and sacred to everyone who has. Sunday mornings belonged to Nana's kitchen, pancakes and weak coffee, and her reading the obituaries out loud like box scores. 10 good years. Then, in the fall of 2024, Nana started making appointments she wouldn't explain. Driving herself downtown to see a lawyer named Harriet Cole, and coming home with her mouth pressed flat like a woman sealing an envelope. The diagnosis came in October of 2024. Congestive heart failure, end stage, and Nana took the news the way she took a coupon that had expired, with brief irritation and immediate planning. She chose hospice at home. And because life enjoys irony, the case went to Corrin County Hospice, the agency I work for, though not to me. I want to be precise here, because it matters later. I was never her nurse. Her nurse was a colleague named Dana, who managed her medications and her chart. I was her granddaughter. I did granddaughter things. I cooked, I sat, I drove, I lost at gin rummy on purpose, and got caught doing it. The green kitchen table filled up on a rotation Nana didn't organize but absolutely commanded. Ruth, from next door. Carmen Fairfield, who owned the diner and brought pie with opinions attached. Half the gray-haired women in Maple Glen came through that kitchen like it was a chapel with better snacks. And twice more that winter, Nana had Harriet Cole over, and the two of them shut the door to the dining room for an hour. When I asked, she waved her hand. Paperwork, honey. Old women and paperwork. But one night in February, near the end, she was sitting up against her pillows looking small in a way I hated, and she took my wrist with more grip than she had any business having. When they come smiling, she said, you let Harriet do the talking first, promise me. I said, when who comes smiling, Nana? She just looked at me, steady, the way she'd looked at that court investigator a decade before. Promise me, she said. So I promised. 3 weeks later she was gone, and I was standing on her porch reading an index card taped to her door. My parents ran the funeral like a campaign event. My mother wore the correct black and cried at the correct volume, dabbing under her eyes to protect her makeup. My dad stood at the church door shaking every hand in Maple Glen, accepting condolences for a woman he'd tried to have declared incompetent, and I watched people who didn't know any better squeeze his shoulder. I sat with Ruth and Carmen. I'd been up all night with a patient and I was running on hospice autopilot, which is the only reason I didn't flinch when my mother materialized beside me at the casket. 10 years of silence, and she slid her arm through mine like we did this every Sunday. Her perfume hadn't changed. She looks peaceful, my mother said, and then, in the same breath with the casket 18 inches away, we should talk about the estate, sweetheart. As a family. As a family. I hadn't been family since an October night in 2014, but Nana's money didn't know that yet, as far as my mother was concerned. Across the aisle, my cousin Kayla, 26 now, gave me a little wave and then looked quickly at her phone, and I clocked that too. Hospice teaches you who's crying for the dying and who's crying for the furniture. I said nothing. I'd made a promise about exactly this moment, even if I didn't understand it yet. And 2 days later, the letter came. Cream envelope. Law Office of Harriet Cole. Addressed to me, with copies noted to Gregory and Pamela Woods. All interested parties were invited to attend the reading of the estate plan of Marlene Woods, Thursday, at 10 in the morning. My phone rang within the hour. My mother, warm as fresh bread. We'll pick you up, sweetheart. We should walk in together. I drove myself. Harriet Cole's office had law books and a coffee machine older than me, and Harriet herself turned out to be 66 years old, with reading glasses on a chain, and the general climate of a woman who had never once been talked over successfully. My parents arrived in their church clothes. My mother had brought a leather folio, and it sat on her lap the whole time. Prepared. Harriet read without theater. The estate of Marlene Woods, held in the Marlene Woods Revocable Trust, consisted of the house on Sycamore Street, appraised at $475,000, the commercial building downtown that used to be her fabric shop, the Spool and Thimble, leased now, valued at $610,000, investment accounts totaling $2,290,000, built out of 40 years of fabric and index funds, and the deep patience of a woman who thought paying retail was a moral failure. Cash and personal property, $125,000, $3.5 million, and every dollar of it, the house, the building, the accounts, all of it, to her granddaughter Ensley Woods, sole beneficiary. To her son Gregory and his wife Pamela, $10,000 each, quote, with my thanks for the lesson they taught me in 2014, unquote. The room went so quiet I could hear the coffee machine. I sat there with my ears ringing, and I watched my mother, because 10 years of missing someone teaches you to watch them. She didn't flinch. She smiled. She reached over, took my hand in both of hers and said, warm as a heating pad, "Oh, sweetheart, what a responsibility for you. Of course, we'll manage it for you." Like the money had been left to them with an errand attached. I took my hand back, gently, and said, "No, thank you." And my mother kept smiling as she gathered her coat. And that smile scared me more than the note on the door had. It was the smile of a woman with a plan. The first move wasn't a lawyer. The first move was casserole diplomacy. My mother called that Sunday, and her voice had a register I'd never heard aimed at me, soft, unhurried, almost shy. She wanted to have me over for dinner. "No business, Ensley, no estate talk, just family. I've missed you." I want to be honest with you about what happened inside my chest when she said that, because I think some of you already know. I was 28 years old. I owned scrubs older than my relationship with my parents, and some animal part of me, some 18-year-old still standing on a dark porch doing math, sat up at the sound of my mother's voice saying, "I've missed you," the way a dog sits up at keys in the door. I knew what this was. Let me be clear that I knew. I had watched this woman price a stroke victim's house from the visitor chair of the hospital. People ask, afterward, why would you even go? Here's the answer. And it's the truest thing in this whole story. You can know exactly what someone is, and still be starving for them. Estrangement doesn't kill the hunger. It just teaches you to eat around it. So I said yes. I told myself I was doing reconnaissance. I ironed a blouse like it was armor, drove the 40 minutes to Dayton, to a brick house with no porch light burning, and I sat in my old chair at my mother's table. And for 1 hour, I'll admit it to you and to nobody else, it was nice. The pot roast was the same. The stories were the same. My dad laughed at my jokes. And then the dessert plates came out, and next to my slice of pie, my mother set down a plastic-bound folder. The cover page said Woods Family Wealth Management Plan in the font of a bank brochure. My mother had built a PowerPoint of my inheritance. Inside, in tabbed sections, was the whole architecture. A family LLC to hold the house, the building, the accounts. Managing members, Gregory and Pamela Woods. A monthly allowance for me, the word allowance, in print, aimed at a 28-year-old woman who ran night shifts alone with dying strangers. Page 6 had a signature line with a little plastic arrow stuck on, pointing where I was supposed to sign my grandmother's life over to the 2 people she had specifically walled out of it. My dad studied his pie. That shadow behind the curtain again. Just better lit. My mother talked the whole time in her loan officer voice. Reasonable, warm, terms like fiduciary responsibility and protecting the assets, and "You're so busy with your work, honey." I let her finish. Hospice teaches you that too, letting people finish. Then I closed the folder, set it by my plate, and said, "Thank you for dinner. The pot roast was perfect. I'm not signing this. The temperature in that dining room dropped 10 degrees in 1 second. My mother looked at me for a long moment, and the softness went out of her face like a switch had been flipped somewhere at the main breaker, and what was left was the woman from the courthouse parking lot in 2014. "We tried the nice way," she said. I picked up my purse and let myself out past the dark porch. If you've ever sat at a table where love came with paperwork, tell me in the comments what you did, because I read every one of them. And stay with me, because that night I made an enemy on purpose for the first time in my life, and you're about to see exactly what it cost them. If you're new here, subscribe. This is the part where it stops being polite. 3 weeks later, a man in a golf shirt walked up to the nurse's station at the hospice office, asked if I was Ensley Woods, and handed me a manila envelope in front of 2 co-workers and a grieving family. "You've been served. Have a good one." I read it in my car. In the probate court of Coran County, Ohio. Gregory Woods and Pamela Woods, petitioners, contesting the last will and trust of Marlene Woods. And the grounds made my hands go cold on the steering wheel. Undue influence by a caregiver, lack of testamentary capacity. 11 pages of lawyer language arranging my whole life into a crime. The dutiful granddaughter recast as a professional who had isolated a dying woman, alienated her from her loving son, and steered $3.5 million into her own pocket. They wanted the trust thrown out. They wanted the estate distributed as if no will existed, which in Ohio would hand a son his mother's fortune. And buried in the motions was the the sentence with my mother's fingerprints on it. Petitioners further request the court appoint them interim managers of the estate during these proceedings. Manage it for you. She'd found a way to say it in legal stationery. Until it was sorted out, everything froze. The accounts, the house, all of it locked, while the court decided whether my grandmother had been of sound mind, a question Nana would have found hilarious and then filed somewhere for revenge. Harriet called me that evening. Her voice was level in a way I'd learned to lean on. "They have every legal right to file this," she said. "That's the ugly beauty of the law, Ensley. Any fool can knock on the courthouse door. Now come to my office. Your grandmother left some instructions about this exact knock." Before I could get to Harriet's office, the family phone tree got to work. You have to understand how a smear moves through a small county. It doesn't march. It seeps. My aunt in Columbus heard I had gotten myself written into the will. A great-uncle heard I'd been medicating Marlene at the end. You know, she was a nurse. By Friday, a woman at Hartman's grocery looked at me too long over the cart corral, and I knew my mother's version of me had beaten me to the checkout line. Then Kayla texted. My cousin, the one I'd taught to parallel park, the one whose prom dress Nana hemmed for free. "Hey, I just think you should do the right thing and share. They're your parents. Aunt Pam says you'll be hearing from the lawyers anyway," Aunt Pam says. I stared at that text for a long time, and I typed a reply and deleted it, twice, and then I put the phone face down, and when I picked it back up an hour later, I'd been blocked. Allie, removed from the board. That one cost me something real, and I want it on the record that it cost her more, eventually. Though not in money. There's no coupon for being on the wrong side when it counted. That Sunday I was sitting in my apartment above the hardware store with the lights off, phone face down, when someone knocked. Ruth Delgado stood in my hallway holding a pot of chicken soup with both hands like it was a casserole-shaped weapon, and her eyes were dry and furious. "You're not answering your phone," she said, pushing past me to the stove. "So I'll say it here. Marlene told us this would happen. All of it, honey. Every move they're making," she called it. "Us," she said. "Marlene told us." I wanted the rest, but Ruth only patted my hand and said Harriet did the explaining in this outfit. She just did the soup. 2 things happened that week. First, Harriet, as trustee, asked me to move into Nana's house. An occupied house is an insured house, an empty one is a liability, and the court fight could take a year. My parents' lawyer objected within a day, calling it the caregiver occupying the disputed asset. Harriet replied in writing that the trustee had made an operational decision and the petitioners were welcome to bring it up with Judge Marsh. So I packed the same 2 suitcases, out of some instinct I won't examine, and I moved 6 streets over, into the house where the porch light was. Second, the first night there, I went looking for the switch. I wanted to be the one to turn it on, the way she'd turned it on for me. I traced the wire from the porch fixture down into the hall closet, and there, screwed to the wall above the fuse box, was a little mechanical timer, beige plastic, older than me, its dial notched at 7 in the evening. She hadn't been flipping that switch by hand all those years. She'd bought a machine to make me a promise, back in October of 2014, and that machine had kept it every single evening for more than 10 years, through storms and Christmases and her own dying, and it was keeping it still. Click. 7 o'clock. Light on, whether the woman who said it was alive or not. I sat on the closet floor and finally came apart, quietly, on my own time. Then I did something that didn't come natural. Ruth knocked that evening with soup number 3, and instead of telling her I was fine, which was my whole personality, I opened the door all the way and let her in. She looked around the kitchen, at the green table, and said, "Good. Now, has Harriet shown you the letters yet?" Harriet spread the file across her conference table the next morning like a surgeon laying out instruments. "Your grandmother," she said, "did not guess. She remembered." And then she walked me through the fortress Marlene Woods had spent 10 years building. The trust was created in March of 2015, 5 months after my parents put my suitcases on the porch. She'd sat in this same office, 72 years old, furious in her Sunday coat, and said she'd just watched what her son would do for money, and she intended to make it useless to him. Every few years she came back and tightened a bolt. The final amendment, January of 2024, 9 months before any diagnosis, before any hospice, back when she was still hauling her own mulch. Attached to it, 2 letters from 2 different doctors, Dr. Patel and an internist in Dayton she'd booked herself. Each one examining her the same week she signed, each one certifying her memory, her judgment, and in Dr. Patel's dry phrasing, a degree of financial acumen exceeding my own. Harriet had met with her alone each time. No family in the building, standard protocol done to the letter, every meeting logged. Do you see it? Capacity? Documented twice, independently, dated. Influence? Impossible. I hadn't even known the trust existed. My grandmother had built her paperwork like a woman who'd been ambushed once and never intended to be ambushed again, and every bolt she tightened was aimed at one future Thursday in a courtroom. "There's more," Harriet said, closing the folder, and for the first time I saw something like anticipation cross her face. "There's a page I'm not permitted to show you before the hearing, Marlene's orders." She wrote them down. I said, "Her orders say you can't show me?" Harriet almost smiled. "Her orders say Judge Marsh gets to read it first, out loud." She was very specific about the out loud. "In August they deposed me. If you've never been deposed, it's a conference room with a court reporter, a camera, and a lawyer paid to unstitch you politely. My parents' attorney was a man named Barrett Voss, 50-something, silver glasses, the bedside manner of a paper cut. For 2 hours he asked reasonable questions in a reasonable voice. My shifts, my access to Nana's house, whether I'd ever driven her to the bank, cooked her meals, been alone with her. All the ordinary mechanics of loving somebody old, replayed slow so they'd look like grooming. Was I present when medications were administered? Did I benefit from her isolation? Then, without any change in tone, like he was asking about the weather, Voss slid the knife in. "Ms. Woods, have you ever been admitted to a psychiatric facility, voluntarily or otherwise?" The court reporter's hands kept moving. The camera kept its red eye on me. 10 years I'd kept that November locked in a drawer no one knew existed, and this man had a copy of the key in a folder, which meant my parents had gone digging through my worst night and handed it to him like ammunition, which is exactly what it was. The how of it turned out to be stupidly simple. At 19 I was still listed on my father's health insurance, and the statements go to the policyholder. They had known for 10 years. They had known, and said nothing, and saved it. I heard my lawyer object to relevance. I heard myself answer anyway, level, The voice I use at 4 in the morning with frightened patience. Yes. In 2015. For 3 days. I checked myself in, and I checked myself out. Voss made a small note, pleased, and quoted my mother without knowing it. Or maybe knowing it exactly. Debts of gratitude are still debts. Wouldn't you agree? I didn't answer that one. When it ended, he squared his papers like a man clearing a dinner table and said, "We'll see you at the hearing, Miss Woods, unless your family would rather settle this like a family." In the parking garage, my hands finally shook. 2 weeks after the deposition, my supervisor called me in before my shift and couldn't look at me. An anonymous complaint had been filed with the Ohio Board of Nursing, elder financial abuse by a hospice professional. Anonymous, but it cited the probate case number so we can retire the mystery of authorship. And here's the part people don't understand about licensed work. It doesn't matter how absurd the complaint is. The board has to investigate. The process takes months. And while it grinds, an agency that cares for the dying cannot staff a nurse under an abuse investigation. Nobody was cruel about it. That almost made it worse. My supervisor's voice wobbled when she asked for my badge, and I unclipped it and set it on her desk. 6 years of night shifts in a rectangle of laminate, and I walked out through the lobby past a wall that said dignity in 4 languages. Understand what they'd found. The trust was a fortress, so they'd stopped shooting at the fortress. They were shooting at me. The license was the one thing I'd built entirely alone. No inheritance, no help, 12-hour nights and a state exam, and my parents had figured out that it was the one thing of mine the court couldn't protect. By then my savings were nearly gone too. The trust could pay Harriet to defend the trust. That's the law. But the trust could not pay for my private lawyer or my licensed defense, and 18 of my $21,000 had already gone out the door. That night I sat in my car outside Nana's house and watched the porch light click on at 7, right on schedule. A dead woman keeping her promise while I figured out how to keep mine. Then an email arrived from Voss's office. His clients, it said, remain open to a family resolution. The people who set the fire were selling extinguishers. If your family has ever turned the law into a weapon, tell me in the comments. I read everyone. And stay close, because the next hearing is the one from the title. The one where the judge turned the page. Subscribe, so you don't miss what was on it. The preliminary hearing was in October, in a small oak-paneled courtroom in the Corrin County Courthouse, Judge Ellen Marsh presiding, a woman about 60 with the patience of a person who has heard every version of every family. My parents sat at the petitioner's table in their church clothes. My mother was serene. She whispered something to Voss and smiled, and I watched her scan the room like it was already hers. And honest to God, I think in her mind, this was the finish line, the day the court would hand a responsible adult the keys. Judge Marsh put on her glasses and paged through the trust in the quiet. Then she stopped turning pages. "Counsel?" she said to Voss. "Before we schedule anything. Has your client read Article 9 of this instrument?" And she read it out loud, into the record, in a courtroom voice that carried to the last row. Article 9. If any beneficiary of this trust contests its validity or seeks control of its assets through legal proceedings, that beneficiary forfeits any and all interest granted herein. The $10,000 bequests to Gregory and Pamela Woods, conditional. Contest the trust, and the gift evaporates. My mother's smile held because 10,000 meant nothing against 3.5 million. But the judge wasn't finished. "There is an attached statement of intent," she said, "executed and notarized January of 2024. The testator requests it be read aloud in open court in the event of any challenge." She turned the page. To the court, from Marlene Woods. In 2014, my son Gregory and his wife Pamela petitioned to have me declared incompetent so they could manage my affairs. The court said no. I have spent 10 years making sure the answer stays no. If they are in your courtroom now, they have come after my death, smiling, offering to manage what I left behind. I ask you to read this page to them so they understand that I am, one final time, ahead of them. The silence was total. And I watched it happen, the thing from the title. My mother's smile didn't break. It just drained. From the eyes down, like something unplugged. My grandmother had predicted their exact play, in writing, 16 months before they made it, and every stranger in that room had just heard it. Voss rose anyway and asked for an evidentiary hearing on undue influence, because if the trust itself fell, Article 9 fell with it. Judge Marsh granted it, set it for 6 weeks out, and I would swear on the green table she looked at my parents a half-second longer than she needed to. In the hallway after, my mother walked straight to me, close, perfume unchanged, and said, quiet enough that only I could hear it, "You think a dead woman can protect you?" 3 nights later, my dad came to the house alone. I found him standing at the bottom of the porch steps, inside the circle of the light, not knocking, a 59-year-old man holding his car keys like a hat. I stayed in the doorway. He looked older than the funeral. "Your mother wasn't always like this," he said, and then he told me a story I'd never heard in all my years as their daughter. My mother's mother died in 1991 when my mom was 23. There was no estate. There was a shoebox. Bills, collection notices, a repossessed car, a funeral nobody could pay for. My mother worked 3 jobs to bury her own mother and spent 2 years paying off a dead woman's debts, and she came out of it with one conviction welded into her, that money left loose is a knife left on the floor, and that the person who grabs it first and controls it is the one who loves the family most. "She thinks she's protecting you," he said, "from ending up like her mother. She can't hear how it sounds." For a second, standing in Nana's doorway, I saw it. The whole sad machine of it. A scared 23-year-old building a ledger so the floor could never fall out again, and I felt the pull of that old ache. And I want you to know, pity is real, even when it changes nothing. Because here's what I said. "And you? What's your story?" He looked at his keys, the shadow behind the curtain, the silence behind the newspaper. 40 years of "if you think it's best, Pam." "Just give her something, Ensley," he said finally. "She'll stop. We can be done." Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "She's wrong." An installment plan. I said goodnight and closed the door, gently, and 3 days later my mother offered me the one thing money can't buy, and I almost took it. It came in her handwriting, 4 pages, and it was the letter I had been writing for her in my head for 10 years. "Ensley, my firstborn. Not a day has passed. We can withdraw everything, the case, the complaint, all of it. Tomorrow. Come home. Sunday dinners, Christmas, your room. We'll be a family again, the way your grandmother would have wanted. All we ask is that the estate be divided fairly and managed properly, by all of us, together." I sat under the porch light with those pages until 2 in the morning. "I'm not going to perform strength for you here." I read it 9 or 10 times. The animal in my chest, the one that sat up at her voice on the phone, was howling. Because this was the actual prize, wasn't it? Not the money. This. The door reopened, the ledger burned. My mom and my dad at a table with me and nobody keeping score. I had testified against them at 17 and been billed for it ever since, and here was the invoice marked paid in full. All it cost was everything Nana spent 10 years building, handed over to the people she built it against, plus one signature agreeing that their love had been a reasonable price all along. Toward dawn I understood the letter was the deposition again, in softer font. My mother wrote to me that night, but the phrase "managed properly" did the answering. She came the next morning for her answer, and I met her on the porch, under the dead light, and I kept my voice as low as hers had ever been. "You can't buy back what you threw away, Mom, and I'm done paying interest on being your daughter." Something in her face closed like a bank at 5. She walked to her car, and from the open door she gave me one last look. "Then you'll lose the license too," she said. And that was the last conversation my mother and I ever had as mother and daughter. The formal offer arrived the following week on Voss letterhead, and it was elegant the way a trap is elegant. $700,000, styled as a family settlement, in exchange for full withdrawal of the will contest. And one paragraph lower, the sentence that had been aimed at me all along. It has been our clients' experience that licensing matters tend to resolve themselves when families reconcile. Translation: pay us and the board complaint evaporates. Fight us and it doesn't. And if I fought, Voss noted, almost apologetically, my medical history from November 2015 would be subpoenaed and examined in open court, in a county where the newspaper still prints probate news between the football scores. Understand the math I was staring at. 700,000 was 20%, and Harriet believed we would win, but believed is a lawyer's word, and meanwhile the board investigation would grind on for a year or more with my badge in a drawer. My savings were down to $3,000, and the price of winning was standing in front of my hometown while a lawyer read my psychiatric records out loud. My own attorney, the one I was paying with money I didn't have, told me plainly that taking the deal was the rational move. You'd keep 80% and your privacy. I've seen people pay more for less. Even the math of surrender was reasonable. That's what a good trap looks like. Harriet was quiet for a long time when I asked her. The trust can survive a trial, she said finally. That was built. The question, Ensley, is whether you want to. Nobody gets to grade you on that answer. They sent a draft agreement with a signature line and a little plastic arrow, my mother's arrow, pointing at where I was supposed to end it. And I sat at the green table that night, and I picked up the pen. I had the agreement flat on the green table, pen uncapped, and I want to be honest, I had decided to sign it, 20% to make it stop. People pay more for less. My hand was actually moving when the knock came, and it was Ruth, with Carmen behind her holding a pie like a second opinion. They didn't ask what the papers were. Gray-haired women don't have to. They sat down at the table where they'd sat all winter, and Ruth put her hand flat on the pages, not grabbing, just resting, like you'd rest a hand on a casket. Let me tell you what I watched for 10 years, she said. Every evening, 7 o'clock, that porch light came on. Rain, snow, the night of her diagnosis, the night she died. I used to check it from my kitchen window like a lighthouse. One time I asked her why she didn't just leave it burning all day, and Marlene said, because then it wouldn't mean anything, Ruthie. It has to be a choice. It has to cost a little, every single day, or it's not a promise, it's just a bulb. Carmen cut the pie without asking. She wasn't leaving you money, honey, Ruth said. Money was the smallest thing in that house. She was leaving you witnesses. I looked at the signature line, at the little plastic arrow, and Ruth asked the question I have thought about every day since. You've been paying for their love your whole life, Ensley. Whatever this paper costs, add it to that pile. What's the interest rate? I sat with that. Then I picked the agreement up, squared the pages the way Voss had, and tore them in half, and the sound was the best thing I'd heard since Nana laughed. Nobody at that table knew yet what I was going to do instead, including me, until I said it out loud. To beat their story, I have to tell mine, all of it, under oath. Here is what I understood at that table, and if you take one thing from my story, take this. Their entire artillery, the deposition, the complaint, the settlement letter, all of it ran on one fuel: my silence. The 72 hours was only a weapon while I treated it like a wound. A secret can be extorted. A story can't. So the next morning I sat in Harriet's office and gave my instructions, and for once in my life I did not soften them. No settlement, no counteroffer, no delay. And then the part that made my own lawyer blink. I would sign a waiver and release my behavioral health records myself, voluntarily, into the case, before Voss could subpoena a single page. You cannot threaten to expose what a woman has already laid on the table in her own handwriting. The blackmail died in that signature. 18 months of leverage gone in one stroke of a pen, my parents never saw coming. Because people who keep ledgers cannot imagine giving away the thing you could charge the most for. Then we built the witness list, and it wasn't lawyers. It was Dr. Patel and his 20 years of charts. It was Dana, the hospice nurse who actually ran Nana's case. And it was the green table, Ruth, Carmen, the whole gray-haired nation of Maple Glen, the people who had watched a porch light burn for 11 years and knew exactly who it burned for. Harriet looked at the list a long time, Your grandmother said you'd get here, she said. She hoped it wouldn't cost this much. The night before the hearing, I ironed my scrubs out of habit, stood there holding the uniform I wasn't allowed to wear, and hung it back up, and chose the gray dress instead. In 6 hours, the whole county would hear about the worst night of my life. From me, first. The evidentiary hearing opened in November, and the courtroom was full, which in Corrin County means the church crowd, the diner crowd, and a reporter from the county paper with a fresh legal pad. Voss went first, and I will give the man this: he was good. For one entire day he built a woman out of my outline, a trained medical professional, embedded in a dying widow's home. Access to her routines, her moods, her medications. A granddaughter with. And here he let the pause do the work. A documented psychiatric history, who stood to gain $3.5 million from an old woman's altered estate plan. My mother testified in a blue suit with a tissue in her fist, and she was devastating, poised, wounded, reasonable. We only ever wanted to manage things properly. Ensley is fragile. She's been fragile for years. We were trying to protect her and my mother-in-law both. She had grieved more convincingly on that stand than she had at the casket. Then Kayla, my cousin, 26 years old, avoiding my eyes, testifying that I had kept to myself and gotten close to Mrs. Woods at the end, 2 innocent facts arranged into fingerprints. That was the day I learned you can lose a person twice. The judge listened to all of it without a face. Ruth sat behind me the whole day, and behind her Carmen, and behind Carmen, 3 rows of gray heads that had no legal function at all, except that Judge Marsh could count. When they adjourned, Voss packed his briefcase looking like a man ahead on points, and honestly, he was. Judge Marsh looked over her glasses. Ms. Woods, the court will hear you tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. That night the porch light clicked on at 7, and I sat under it and practiced nothing, because Nana always said the truth doesn't need rehearsal, it just needs a witness willing to go first. I took the stand at 9 in the morning in the gray dress, and I used the only voice I own, the 4 in the morning voice, the one for frightened people in dark rooms, low and level and unhurried. And I told it. All of it. October 2014, 2 weeks past my 18th birthday, the key that wouldn't turn, 2 suitcases packed by my mother with the sweaters folded, because she folds everything, even an abandonment. My father's shape behind the curtain, my mother's voice through 4 inches of door. Family is a ledger, Ensley, and you are deep in the red. And I watched the court reporter type my mother's sentence into the permanent record of the state of Ohio. I told them about the 6th Street walk in the dark and the porch light coming on. And then, because it was mine to tell now, I told them about November 2015. 19 years old, 13 months into exile. The night my hands wouldn't stop and my thoughts turned into a drain. The drive I made alone to the county hospital. The form I signed alone. The 72 hours. The form I signed to leave. Alone. Counsel has called me fragile, I said. And I looked at nobody except Judge Marsh, and I kept my voice exactly where I keep it at a bedside. I checked myself in at 19 with no one to call, and I checked myself out and finished nursing school and spent 6 years sitting with this county's dying. I'm told that's a psychiatric history. On my ward, we call it surviving. Then Harriet stood and read into the record my waiver. Every page of those records released by me, voluntarily, weeks ago, and I watched the leverage my parents had mined out of my worst night turn to vapor in a silent courtroom. Last, the dates, laid out plain. The trust was born in March of 2015, 5 months after the porch. Amended for the last time in January of 2024, 9 months before the diagnosis, 2 doctors certifying her mind the same week. My grandmother didn't change her plan because I got close to her money, I said. She changed it because she watched them come for hers. I stepped down. My mother was staring at me, and behind all that composure something had begun, very quietly, to slide. Then came the afternoon I want read at my funeral. Dr. Patel, 20 years of charts, 2 capacity letters, and the flat professional opinion that Marlene Woods had a degree of financial acumen exceeding my own. Dana, the hospice nurse of record, walking the court through every medication log, every visit note, confirming under oath that I had never once handled her chart, her drugs, or her paperwork, that I was, in the file, listed only as family. And then the gray-haired nation took the stand one by one, and the courtroom stopped being Voss's. Carmen, who'd fed half the county, telling Judge Marsh that Marlene planned this trust, the way she planned everything, ma'am, sober as a hymn and twice as loud. And Ruth, 71 years old, hands folded, 30 years next door. She testified about the porch light. The timer set in October of 2014, the bulb she watched from her kitchen window every evening for 11 years. Rain, snow, holidays, the night Marlene died, still burning. That light was for the girl, she said. Everyone on Sycamore Street knew what it meant. It meant that child had a home whether her parents wanted her or not. Voss tried to cross her. He suggested elderly neighbors misremember things, and Ruth looked at him over her glasses the way you'd look at gum on a pew. Old women notice things, young man. It's all we do. The gallery laughed, and Judge Marsh let them. And that's when my mother broke. Not a scream at first, a correction. She stood up at the petitioner's table over Voss's hand on her arm, because a courtroom full of people were smiling at a version of the family where she was the villain, and my mother had never once lost control of a narrative in her life. We fed her for 18 years, she said, too loud for the room. You don't get to walk away from a debt like that. Family is a ledger. It is. And there it was. 50 strangers, a court reporter, and a judge heard my mother state the household religion out loud, in her own voice, the exact sentence from the porch, and no one had extracted it from her. She'd offered it. Judge Marsh gavelled a 30-minute recess. When she came back, she had the trust in one hand and a ruling in the other. Judge Marsh read from the bench, and she did not hurry. The petition to invalidate the trust of Marlene Woods, denied, with prejudice. On capacity, the court found 2 independent contemporaneous medical certifications and the testimony of a treating physician of 20 years, against 0 medical evidence from the petitioners. On undue influence, the court found, and I'm quoting the words that mattered to me, no evidence whatsoever that the beneficiary influenced this estate plan, and abundant evidence that the plan was a response, of many years' standing, to the petitioner's own prior conduct. The trust stood. Every bolt Nana tightened, held. Then, Article 9. The court found the contest had been brought without probable cause, which under the clause meant the conditional bequests were forfeit. My parents had sued for $3.5 million, and the arithmetic of their ambition came due at 0, minus the $10,000 each my grandmother had left them as bait, minus their own legal fees, and the court noted for the record it would entertain the trustee's motion to recover fees from the petitioners. My mother took the sound of all this the way you take a diagnosis. My father took it looking at his keys. Outside, in the hallway, by the tall windows, she crossed to me one last time. Up close, her composure had cracks in it now. Fine ones, like a windshield the morning after a cold night. And she said, and I believe it was the truest thing she ever said to me, after everything we gave you. Not sorry, not even angry, really. Just the ledger, open to my page, one final time, and I heard my own voice come out the way it does when I turn off a monitor that's done its work, quiet, and finished. Then consider us settled. I walked past her, through the doors, into the November cold, and I did not look back. And this is the part where I'm supposed to tell you it felt like victory. It felt like a discharge. Somebody I'd been treating my whole life had finally been released. I want to be straight with you about the price, because every win has won, and the videos that skip this part are lying to you. The county paper ran it on page 2. My name, the trust. And one paragraph, sourced from the public record I had opened myself, about a 19-year-old girl and 72 hours in the behavioral health unit. For a week, people at Hartman's looked at me 1 second too long, and I let them. That was the cost of taking the weapon away, and I'd pay it again. But I did pay it. Privacy, once spent, doesn't refund. And there was the other thing. That night, I sat under the porch light and I took out my phone and found the contact that still said Mom and Dad, a habit 10 years dead. I didn't block the number. Blocking is for doors people might knock on. I just deleted it, and the screen asked, was I sure? And for the first time in my adult life, the answer was clean. The girl who kept a door cracked open for them was gone. I'd left her on the stand, under oath, where she finally got to matter. 6 weeks after the ruling, the Board of Nursing closed the complaint, unsubstantiated, and my supervisor handed my badge across her desk with wet eyes and a speech she couldn't finish. My first shift back, an 80-pound farm widow held my hand at 3 a.m. and told me I had calm hands, and I had to step into the hallway for a minute on my own time. The house came fully mine when the appeal window closed, and I did what Nana would have done with it, which is to say, nothing dramatic and everything deliberate. The green table runs full again on Sunday mornings. Ruth and Carmen and the gray-haired nation, pancakes on the old griddle, coffee still criminally weak because some recipes are load-bearing. The rent from the Spool and Thimble building, $3,800 a month, goes into something Harriet helped me set up called the Marlene Fund. It pays for respite care, a weekend off, a paid aide, a tank of gas, for family caregivers in Coran County, the daughters and granddaughters sleeping in recliners next to hospital beds. No applications longer than 1 page, no payback, ever. House rule. In the spring, 1 envelope came from Dayton, my father's handwriting, alone. Inside was a check for $3,900, which meant nothing until I did the math, and then it meant everything. $150 a month, from 16 to 18. He had refunded the room and board to the dollar with 1 line on a sticky note. I'm sorry. I didn't tear it, and I didn't call. I signed it over to the fund, where it bought 11 exhausted caregivers a weekend of sleep, which is the only interest that debt could ever pay. And in June, Ruth showed up on the porch with a girl named Nadia, 18, a nursing student whose parents had put her things in garbage bags over a boy and a Pell Grant. I heard myself say the rent was $1 a year, and no, she couldn't owe me. House rule. Then I went to the hardware store and had a key cut. And handing it over felt like the entire estate changing hands for the second time, correctly. Tonight, it's late September again, coming up on 12 years since 2 suitcases sat on a porch. Through the kitchen window I can see Nadia at the green table with her anatomy flashcards, wearing my old sweatshirt, eating pancakes she did not pay for. At 7 exactly, the timer in the hall closet gives its little click, the same click it has given every evening since 2014, and the porch light comes on over Sycamore Street.